Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. House Republicans report something that is unsurprising but troubling nonetheless. New congressional report accuses an office within the State Department of funding groups that targeted and censored small businesses in the United States, overstepping its mandate to combat foreign disinformation. Gee, what a surprise. The activities of the State Department's Global Engagement Center, which has an estimated budget of $61 million and a staff of 125. Certainly bigger than our Russian colluders. Certainly bigger than Tenet Media. Has been funding groups, this Global Engagement Center, been funding groups engaged in domestic censorship. The investigation began following, and then we've talked about this, following a series of reports of this agency's involvement with the Global Disinformation Index, which is a British group that pressures advertisers to basically defund right-of-center media outlets in the United States. Moreover, the National Endowment for Democracy, protecting our democracy, I presume, that's a State Department-funded nonprofit that awards hundreds of thousands of dollars to that Global Disinformation Index, which is the British group pressuring advertisers not to advertise on right-of-center media outlets. It's just more of this network of censors that was nicely detailed by Elon Musk, by Elon Musk's cooperation with reporters like Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, as so memorialized in the Twitter files, the pressure that was coming directly from the government on social media companies to do things like put a chill on the Hunter Biden laptop story, or put a chill on any cognitive dissonance about COVID policies. The CIA, the State Department, the FBI. These are the dragons we must slay, to borrow from Mr. Burns, it would seem, these days. And Trump made that case about the cases he faces at the debate on Tuesday night.
Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York, every one of those cases. And then they say, oh, he's a criminal. They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case. And what happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
Well, it's not just fake cases against Trump, and it's not just fake cases against those who are political opponents of the ruling class. It's also, the weaponization is also in furtherance of silencing dissent. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Joseph Sweeney. He served in the CIA's Office of General Counsel for 25 years. He's the author of the new book, Dangerous Injustice: How Democrats Weaponize the DOJ to Protect Biden and Persecute Trump. Joseph Sweeney, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
What's your reaction to what Trump said on that debate stage Tuesday night?
I suspect he may have read my book, because that's exactly what I prove in my book. You know, for 25 years, I worked on espionage, investigations, and prosecutions, to include cases where senior government officials had mishandled classified information. So I'm an expert on these types of cases. And so I did a deep dive on Biden's case and Trump's case, comparing them to each other and how DOJ and the FBI handled those cases. And I was just shocked at what I discovered. With every stone I unturned, I found more and more malfeasance by the Biden administration, where they had bent over backwards to cover up Biden's malfeasance. And then on the other hand, they bent over backwards to create criminality on Trump's behalf. And what I could see in looking, and I delve deep into this in my book, I look at the FBI raid affidavit on Mar-a-Lago. I've written hundreds of those affidavits, if not thousands, explaining classified information to federal judges. And I found so many mistakes in that affidavit. And again, I lay them all out in my book. And it was obvious to me that these weren't the types of mistakes where people were trying to do the right thing but just screwed up. These were things where the law was purposefully being misrepresented to the court. The facts were purposely being misrepresented to the court. And then you compare that with something like Trump's indictment, where they just created new law in order to make Trump's conduct a crime when Trump hadn't even packed any of his boxes for the stuff that got sent to Mar-a-Lago and was actually in the process of returning things that he was finding. You compare that to Biden's case, Biden had over 50 years of classified documents, spanning 50 years, all over his house. These weren't things that were just in boxes. They'd been unpacked and put into filing folders, some of which had Biden's own handwriting on them. So there's no doubt that Biden knew that he had classified information, and he was at a minimum grossly negligent in the handling of classified information, which is also a violation of the Espionage Act.
Yeah, but the special counsel determined that he wasn't mentally fit to stand trial, correct?
I'm glad you brought that up. The special counsel in his report actually had many, many, many excuses why not to prosecute Biden. The excuse that got all the publicity is the exact one that you've described, that he was just too old and senile to be prosecuted. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. In their investigation, the special counsel discovered some tape recordings where Biden was captured on the tapes talking to his ghostwriter. This is someone who Biden had hired to help him write a book after his vice presidency. So at this time, Biden was just a citizen, right? This is February of 2017, 3 years before he became president. And what the tape recording clearly says, you can hear Biden coming up from the basement and saying to his ghostwriter, I just found all the classified stuff downstairs. Now, that was 2017, 3 years before he became president. And it's that tape recording where the special counsel said, at that point in time, Biden's memory was so bad that he could well have forgotten that he just found all that stuff right after he found it. I mean, maybe that's true, but then the man ran for president and served, for almost 4 years now. And so that was 2017. And, it just kind of strains credulity. And there are many, many other excuses, none of which withstand scrutiny when you look at them. But that's what her report did. And so what I do in my book is I kind of put aside the conclusions of the report, and I just look at the fact-finding. And if you look at the fact-finding, it lays out very strong cases of Biden's criminality.
Well, the other thing, too, I mean, in terms of the process that you're talking about, I mean, this predates the actual formal criminal prosecutions of Trump because the misrepresentation to courts of law, I mean, it was made by the FBI to FISA courts for surveillance on Trump in the first place. So, I mean, this seems to me to be emblematic of the culture inside the Beltway.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, too, because in my book, I go all the way back to 2016. I don't just look at the current prosecution against Trump for the, what I call the trumped-up espionage prosecution. I go back to 2016 when the FBI was using very intrusive collection mechanisms that are designed for intelligence. I'm an expert on these collection mechanisms. They're very intrusive, electronic surveillance. They were using these mechanisms to target Trump's campaign unlawfully. But at least back then, they were trying to hide their conduct. That's why they were using these secret mechanisms to target Trump's campaign. But they just got more and more aggressive to the point that they actually raided the president's house and then indicted him. I mean, these are unprecedented actions in our nation's history. They are highly aggressive, and they're blatant, right? So the FBI and DOJ have gotten to a point where they are willing to openly act as an enforcement mechanism for the Democratic Party. That's one of the scariest things. They don't even try and hide it anymore. And half the country is okay with it, applauding it, and actually asking for more of it, which is even scarier.
Well, and I mean, at what point do we say this is not being overly aggressive? It's not being rogue. This is a fifth column action against the sitting president, or it has been this running fifth column action. I mean, his CIA director, we now know, Gina Haspel, after Pompeo, she knew about the Hunter Biden laptop letter. She had to know, just like the FBI had to know, and all those signatories had to know, that the laptop was authentic. It was in the FBI's possession.
Yes, and I know many of the people who signed that letter. They're all Democrats.
Right.
And this is one of the things I talk about in my book. These are political appointees running these agencies, and they are beholden to their political party master. It's just the reality of life. And if they stopped being beholden to their political party masters, they would no longer be in the positions that they're in.
Yeah, but
so
but it's interesting that they have no problem. I mean, it's the master, I guess, is the point of this, because they have no problem not being step and fetch for President Trump. But in point of fact, they're separate and distinct from even those sometimes who appoint them. That's the thing that people, I suppose, need to understand. This is why I suggest, this is a borderline fifth column action at some point.
Yeah, and one of the things I highlight in my book is how the federal bureaucracy actually works, having spent 35 years in it. And I describe it as like Game of Thrones without the bloodshed, right? There are kingdoms and fiefdoms, and there are people who are holdovers from other parties, or I worked for people who were very critical of President Trump, political appointees, even though he appointed them. And so that does happen, right? There are people who are going to be beholden to their political party because that's who they see as their master. And I've served all different administrations, Democrats and Republicans, but I can tell you this type of conduct I have only seen from the Democratic Party.
And is it recent, or have you seen it? Did you see it throughout the course of your 25 years at CIA?
So, for my initial years at the CIA, I was, a relatively low-ranking person. I was a GS-11, and I worked my way up through the ranks. I retired as a CIS-4, which is the civilian equivalent of a 2- or 3-star general. It wasn't until I reached the higher levels, which was about the last 10 years or so, 10 to 12 years, that I was exposed to the most senior levels of government. That's when I started to see these things.
Well, keeping up with the the Game of Thrones metaphor, what should be done to the House of Brennan, your former employer?
It's difficult. It's difficult to try and use criminal law to go after people. It's difficult to use civil law to go after people. What you can do at a minimum is you can seek transparency. You investigate and you publish the results so that at a minimum, these people are publicly shamed, right? The people who are doing these things. And the American people at least can have the truth in front of them. They may or not believe it. They may not want to read it. They may find it uncomfortable, but at least they will know it and they will have that knowledge.
Joseph Sweeney served in the CIA's Office of General Counsel for 25 years. He's the author of the new book we've been discussing, entitled Dangerous Injustice, How Democrats Weaponize the DOJ to Protect Biden and Persecute Trump. Joseph Sweeney, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for your time.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
We know what a woman is. And at Natural Womanhood, we believe that a woman's fertility is beautiful, powerful, and healthy, not something to be controlled or destroyed by doctors and big pharma. Women deserve better. Women deserve to know and claim the uniqueness of their natural